and I am going to start the timer now too. So, 45 minutes on the
Okay.
clock.
All right, here we go, and welcome to the first podcast of Mythical Monster Investigation. And we are your host. I am Archimage, and we've
Shadow
also got.
Fox. I beat you there. Beat you. I'm gonna introduce myself. Damn
And
it.
I am Zed. Yes, you beat me. Congratulations, you beat me in something that didn't matter.
Number one.
Always well done. Okay, and we are going to go over various monsters in culture, both pop culture and mostly mythological culture. So we're going to be taking a look at their myths, and we're going to be taking a look at how they may have come into being by knowing the time frame, the historical references, and even the symbolism behind the monsters and their, well, various attributes. So, the points that we're going to go over is that with everything, I firmly believe that there is a grain of truth to every legend and myth, that everything is based off something. Would you guys agree?
Yes.
Yes.
Shadow R. Fox?
Yes. No. I already said it.
Oh, okay. You both said yes at the same time. Okay, my bad.
Okay, hear you.
Okay, we're in
Okay.
sync. Good.
There we go.
Okay.
There you
Okay,
go.
so yeah, we believe that every story has a grain of truth, but also something that I have noticed is that modern society, which probably was consistent with every time period, but especially today, is that we're a little bit full of ourselves. We basically think our ancestors were complete idiots. We do not think they were anything but superstitious morons, which personally I think is unfair because our ancestors were pretty smart. While they didn't have the technology of the day, they
I'm
were
sorry,
not stupid.
Alchemist. I gotta cut you off right there because no, our ancestors. You know they got aliens to help them build the pyramids.
Seriously, there is no evidence of that. You're seriously going off the ancient aliens crap?
I knew that would get rise out.
Every archaeologist has you know what? Okay, I'll leave that alone.
No, I hate that so much. I hate whenever someone say the pyramid. Look how structurally sound the pyramids are. Clearly, they must have been made by aliens. I'm like, oh, they're just made by a bunch of people who had nothing better to do than listen to a guy who essentially ruled their entire life when he say build this and make it last, and they had nothing better to do. So.
I mean, yeah, that is pretty much it.
Sorry, I had to bring that one up because you know someone's gonna be like, "What about the aliens in the pyramid?"
I know, of course someone is. No, I'm sorry, we do not believe in ancient aliens. If you believe in it, well, you need to read some archaeology because all archaeologists say they're full of crap. But anyway, I now have completely lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry, I had to go.
Congratulations, we're already derailed. How many minutes has it been? Less than 4? That didn't take long.
Yeah, okay, so, no, what I was on is that our ancestors were not stupid, because a lot of people have that misconception, but our ancestors were actually pretty smart. Like, our ancestors actually managed to calculate the circumference of the Earth within, like, a 1% margin of error. I know people today with calculators who wouldn't even know where to begin to do that, and they somehow figured it out. I mean, in all honesty, could you guys if you guys were asked to calculate the circumference of the world with no modern technology, where would you even begin? It's not a rhetorical question. I'm genuinely asking.
I would first try to. So first you gotta get the size of the Earth, because once you get the size, you can literally just plug the number into the formula.
Okay, how are you gonna get the size of the Earth?
So we're gonna get a very long tape measure, and someone's gonna have to walk a really far distance. Oh no, I believe that if I recall correctly,
Bullshit. Apparently, the answer is bullshit.
if I recall correctly, didn't they actually, because it took them a while to get the circumference. Didn't they have, because I recall, yes, they got the circumference, but wasn't the first several times they got the circumference, they were way off in terms of size of the Earth, if memory served correctly?
That depends. Are you talking about modern day scientists?
No,
or
I'm
ancient
talking
Greeks?
ancient days when they were originally trying. Said they thought they found the circumference. Ancient days, because I recall that they were off in
They
several
were
different.
off, but I'm talking about one person in particular who actually did it pretty well, which I have completely
I
forgotten his name,
Was it a
unfortunately.
Greek
But yes, it
philosopher?
was a Greek.
I think I know. Was it the one that always look, not Galileo, but I think I know who he's talking. The one who always looking at the telescope.
No, that was Middle Ages.
Middle Ages. Okay.
No, I'm sorry. His name was, I'm going to butcher this, Eratosthenes. Eratosthenes. That's probably not all how you say it, but he's the one who found it out, and he did it around 255 BC. I mean, that's impressive. They have theories about how he did it, but no one is quite sure how exactly he got so close to the circumference of the Earth. But basically, he did it all with essentially not even pen and paper, like quill and papyrus, or whatever they used for pens in ancient Greece. So that's the point. Our ancestors were not stupid, and they built some amazing things with the technology of their time. So we have to get out of this mindset that we are the zenith of human intellect, when there's a big difference between ignorance and blatant stupidity.
Oh.
Ignorance is just not knowing something. You can learn things, but you can't fix stupid.
That's how he. Okay, they think they know how he did it. To give people context on how they think they know how he did it, he basically measured. He got someone. He essentially did do what I did. He got someone, but he didn't go around the whole planet. He didn't go around the whole planet. He got the guy to go to the next town over, which was exactly like 5,000 units of their measurement, and then which is 800 kilometers now. And then from there, he used that to find the circumference by essentially, if I'm understanding this correctly, because they he plugged it into a formula, and I'm trying to I think he was plugged in a formula that essentially was going up against the sun. Sorry, part of the text is getting chopped off because of a freaking ad video, so I can't see the logic behind the function. But essentially,
Google doesn't want you to know higher math.
Well, going off of the website doesn't. Going off of the fact that the Earth was round and it had to be a sphere, and that it had to turn around. He essentially used that as a way to go, okay, well, if this point to this point is this much, and we're at this angle, and to kind of bring it into a whole 360 degrees, he essentially just took 800 kilometers time 50, which came out to 40,000 kilometers, and then that's when part of the stuff get cut off, so I can't finish reading the entire formula. So, but
Okay,
essentially, he did what I did, but he didn't go as extravagant as I did. So, I'm gonna call him lazy.
Essentially, so really, he was lazy. You were literally going to try to take a giant tape measure to measure the circumference of the Earth, where he calculated it.
Yes, he did it. He did it a little bit.
He's the lazy one.
Fine, he did it fancier than me.
Okay, that's all right. So clearly, our ancestors were at least fancier.
That's as good as you're getting.
Okay, so our ancestors were fancier than modern day.
Okay, there we go. Here, a website that actually gave me. Once he knew that it was 500 miles, 800 kilometers, he measured the angle of the sun's rays by this pole, divided the length of the shadow by the height of the pole for an angle of 7.12 degrees. They already knew the Earth was round, so 360 degrees in a circle. So by dividing 360 by 7.2, he arrived at 250, and then from there, what was it? 24,854 miles, 40,000 kilometers, and then and that's essentially how he came to that conclusion. So using a distance he could measure to a pole at an angle and a sun coming in casting a shadow.
So basically a lot of geometry.
Yeah, geometry and stuff, yeah.
Yeah, because the sun casting a shadow, if you know the if you know the height of the pole you're using, you can basically use you can use the formulas for a triangle, though you have to add in the curve a little bit. But yeah, essentially geometry. But again, that's my point. Our ancestors were very clever, despite what people think. And as you just proved, this going back to ancient Greece, Christopher Columbus was not the first person who thought the Earth was round. The whole people used to think the Earth was flat is a myth. That is not true.
Wait. You're telling me all those people who think the Earth is flat and the guy who took a rocket up into the stratosphere thought and said, yep, I see it. It's flat. You telling me he's lying to me?
Yes, I am telling you he's lying to you. Very much so, and you should stop sending him money.
What make you think I'm sending him money? I'm making a fortune.
I forgot who I was talking to.
I'm making a fortune off just selling people a bunch of maps. Basically, I got the best racket. I buy a paper map, and I say this is what the Earth actually looked like to them, and they pay me double the price for an accurate map.
You know what? It's a shame that would work.
It's sad that I know that business strategy would work.
That would entirely work. That hurts a little bit.
I like you could hear the pause where Zed and Argument were like, holy shit, that actually is gonna work.
That would work perfectly. Wow, okay.
That's a working business strategy. Yeah.
Okay, if anybody's curious why I'm so annoyed, it's because there are flat earthers out there, and they frankly piss me off because they have done experiments themselves to prove the Earth was flat and failed miserably, and yet they still have an entire... You know what? Again, let's move on, or we're going to get into a rant. Okay, so the point is our ancestors...
You weren't there already?
Yeah.
Yeah. The point... You know what? I think the point is our ancestors are probably smarter than like half the people alive today. You know what? I think that's the point.
A little bit, yes. I mean, that's what always get me to just build off of you arguments. One thing that someone brought up was that the pyramids, they try to claim this is another reason why aliens had to help. Not just one, they're like, how did they come up with a pyramid being the most structurally sound thing to build, to go up high? And it's like, you mean besides the fact that, common sense would dictate to us that when you're trying to build straight up, if you build just a rectangle, eventually it's going to start reaching a point where it's going to become a little bit unstable, whether it's because the foundation itself and there's too much weight, leaning a tower pizza, or you get a situation, and if you try to build other shapes, it becomes too complicated. Pyramid, eventually you will come to the conclusion, a pyramid's shape is most structurally sound and easier to build.
Yeah, especially when there's evidence that they did actually work things out. Remember, the first pyramid was a step pyramid.
Yeah.
So essentially, they were building on top of knowledge that they had.
Well, they try to claim that the fact that multiple civilizations all came to the conclusion that pyramids was the best shape to build up high, that's proof of alien. I'm like, it's just proof that a good idea, you don't have to can not only originate from one culture, it can, it can travel, it can easily, one culture on the other side of the planet and another culture that never interacted can come to the same conclusion that this is a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the laws of physics stay pretty much constant no matter where you are in the world.
Don't tell some people that.
Yeah, true, but... Yeah, so that's the point that I'm going off of, is that our ancestors were smarter than we give them credit for, and that we really should get off our high horse, because let's face it, a lot of people nowadays, you take away their cell phone, they won't be able to find the bathroom.
They will be dead.
Yeah.
I wish I could say that was a joke. That's not a joke. I swear, you take some people's cell phone.
That's not a joke.
They will die by the end of the day.
Truth. By the end of the hour.
By the end of the day, they will look like an old man in his 30s who's completely down on life, living in a studio apartment, who eats nothing but Cheetos and drinks 5 cans of beer every 5 hours.
I know some people who call that living.
True.
Which is sad, but yeah, let's move on from the sadness. And then the next point I wanted to bring out is to kind of give an idea about the premises we're going on with the stories. Not only that we believe that there's a grain of truth to every legend and myth, but also is the sensationalization. Sorry, let me try that again. Sensationalization of stories. So stories have a way of being sensationalized. I mean, that's how it is. Storytellers like to tell stories, and when storytellers tell stories, they want to make them interesting. They want to make them more interesting. So this is where stories kind of get muddled. It's more interesting if things happened very fast, or the monster wasn't 10 feet tall, he was 100 feet tall. There weren't 20 soldiers, there were 1,000 soldiers, things like that. So where the core is the same, they over exaggerate to make it more interesting. But here's the thing, is that sometimes I've noticed that some stories are more sensationalized than others, and the more sensationalization comes from the more kind of lackluster of the story. If a story is already very sensational, it's actually less prone to sensationalization because it's already very interesting. It doesn't need it. Where some stories are cool but not as good, can need a little bit more to make it interesting. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where we're going with that. And with that mindset, we're going over our first monster in this session, which I thought we'd start off very simple with the Grim Reaper, or basically death. That's a good place to start, right? With death.
Yeah, the one thing humanity don't like to
Yeah.
think about. Let's start with that concept.
Actually, to be fair, in a national poll, this was a while back, but in a national poll, they showed that when talking about fears, death actually wasn't the number one fear.
People fear public speaking.
Public speaking more. Which, yeah, okay. So people are more afraid to give a speech than, be shot in the head. Like, okay, good to know. Again, maybe us looking down our ancestors, I don't think we completely have a right to, considering that. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
So,
I'm sorry. Death is kind of up there for me.
Right. So going on with death. Death is interesting. Like, in every culture across the planet has a physical representation of death. There's a lot of them. Two that I'm going to mention is one, Mot, who is a Canaanite physical interpretation of death. I mention him because he might be the earliest interpretation of death in a physical form that we have.
What was
his
his name
be
again?
One of the first. Mot. Very simple, M-O-T. Mot. And I mention him because, again, he might be one of the first, if not the first, interpretation of death. He is very old.
Okay.
Canaanite, yes. Canaanite, yes. And the second one I want to mention is Thanatos.
Oh, that I know very well.
Yeah, sometimes also called Thanos, not to be confused with the Marvel character. He's a Greek interpretation. I mention him because what's interesting is that this interpretation of death is often depicted as a young man or woman with wings. They're human, but they have wings on their backs, similar to Christian angels, which I find interesting, but we're not going to go in that today. Maybe another episode. But again, it's an interesting depiction. Now, one thing that is actually interesting about a lot of the interpretations of death in various cultures before the Grim Reaper is that a lot of them are actually not terrifying. Many of them are actually very welcoming, calm, peaceful, which is why the Grim Reaper is kind of out of place. Guys have any questions about that or anything you want to add to that?
Well, I mean, to the Thanatos one, I would add the fact that there is a whole story of the man who tricked Thanatos and he was punished so greatly. King Erebus, or what was his name? Basically, if you've ever heard the punishment of forcing to push a boulder up a hill only for it to roll back downhill and do that for all eternity.
Oh, yeah. I think his name was...
Isn't that Sisyphus?
Sisyphus, yeah, that's it.
So, I mean, Sisyphus, he tried to... I mean, other than that story, there's not that many stories around Thanatos in Greek lore. That's the biggest one that I know of because someone actually caught death and tricked death 2 times.
Yeah.
And then not only that, but the funny enough thing is whether this is... because I don't know how ancient Greek viewed it. Hades, people think Hades was the god of death, but he wasn't. He was the god of the underworld.
Yes. And that's specifically the underworld, not Tartarus or their version of hell.
No, it now to be fair, it was the place where and I believe their version of heaven was the Arabian Fields or
The Elysium.
Elysium.
Fields,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I knew it was something with E. So the Elysium Fields and technically Tartarus, if my understanding were correct, they both lie either in the underworld or connected to it, because the underworld was a passageway to it, as my understanding was.
Yes, it was connected to it. So you went to the underworld basically for Hades to judge you.
Yes, and then because we all know Chiron and his
the boatman.
Yeah, and
demanding payment.
Yep. So we know that there was a way. So for some reason nowadays, I don't know whether it was nowadays or back then, or whether it was always like this, Hades always get kind of spoken of as a villain. I think that's more nowadays than anything, but.
Okay, so Hades is actually interesting, and glad you brought that up. So yes, if you actually look at Legends, Hades is actually pretty chill. I mean,
he only did one bad thing, which was Persephone.
And Persephone's also, yeah, that's also debatable. But Hades is a lot of Hades thing is because of Christianity, where Hades is basically associated more with the devil. So he becomes kind of the de facto bad guy when you mix mythologies. But also, this is a little bit of the Greeks' fault, because the Greeks had a very strict taboo against mentioning Hades, because Hades was still the lord of the underworld. You know, he was the person who would judge you and send you to your ultimate fate. So to say Hades was kind of, to the Greeks, like tempting fate. So you weren't supposed to, it's the same way that nowadays we say we don't talk about death. The Greeks said it, don't talk about Hades. And that's why Hades and Persephone were not greatly mentioned, because they feared summoning them. Kind of like saying Bloody Mary in a mirror 3 times.
Which is funny, because Persephone technically was the goddess of fertility, technically.
Yes, and later, in other myths, she's the goddess of the underworld. She
became the queen of the underworld after marrying Hades and everything, but.
Yeah, and there's a whole nuance to that, but yes, essentially, Hades was very chill, but to be fair, the Greeks did have a stipulation against summoning him, because they just didn't want to chance, bringing about the person who judges them ultimately in the end, whether or not he was chill or not. So that's kind of where it was, and where Hades kind of becomes an easy scapegoat to make an easy bad guy, especially thanks to the Disney animated movie Hercules, which I don't care what anybody says, that movie was fun.
It's a fun movie. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, James Wood as Hades was a lot of fun.
Oh, I think most people can't imagine Hades without his voice nowadays.
No, I can't. Not at all. It's a fun movie. But, so that's where it goes, and I think a lot of that reasoning, it's actually an interesting point, because that plays into this monster a bit, because the Grim Reaper was based, the first time the Grim Reaper shows up is around Europe in the late 13th to 14th century. Now, the physical depiction of the Grim Reaper, like I said, is contrastually very different from past deities of death. The Grim Reaper is basically a black-cloaked skeleton wielding an intimidating scythe and beckoning you basically towards death. As far as powers and abilities, he doesn't really... Well, it depends on... Well, all of his powers and abilities that people associate with the Grim Reaper nowadays come from media and different television shows. But back then, he was pretty simple. He comes for you, you die, he takes you to wherever you're going. And that's the Grim Reaper in a nutshell. Which, well, it is interesting that his image, even though being very late as far as an interpretation of death goes, he's the one has populated modern day culture, which is in everything. I mean, there was an entire show around it, like the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. There are talks of Grim Reaper. Ghost Rider, is a skull-bound bounty hunter collecting souls.
Now, technically, he's an angel of vengeance, so...
Yeah, but still, the look is clearly inspired by the Grim Reaper. Yeah. And, well, can you guys think of other ways that the Grim Reaper has inspired modern-day culture?
Well, we got a couple. I believe you gave Zed the challenge of trying to find, for each monster we would do, Zed would try and find a Pokemon that is the equivalent of that monster, and we came up with a few for that.
Exactly.
One.
This is the segue.
So Zed, pull up your
I have
Pokedex.
one that is so. Do I have to get a voice changer now to make me sound like Pokedex?
No, we'll do that next time. That would be awesome if you could.
Actually, yeah, think of that for next time. But yeah, go ahead.
Oh God, I'm gonna have to do research on that now. Okay, it's fine. So this one, ironically enough, it was a bit harder to find things, but I did find one. It doesn't necessarily go with the whole skull and black cloak motif, but it is a Pokemon known for ferrying spirits. And I'm going to go ahead and show both of you that. I'm pretty sure you already know what it probably is. Shadow probably does.
Yeah, I'm
But
the
the
one
one that I have selected, of course, is Dusk Noir,
Duff Noir.
which is a very obvious one. Dusk Noir, yes. More specifically, for the entry right here, it comes and goes between this world and the afterlife. People fear this Pokemon because it is said to suck in lost spirits and take them along,
Okay.
Well, I'll be damned.
thus taking them away to the afterlife.
Wow, I'll be damned. You found a Pokemon to represent death. Okay, well done.
I'm
I'm not
now,
shaking hands,
another
I'm
one to
clapping.
represent a different kind of death. There you go. So yes, I can find one that represents death. I can also find one that's more morbid in this thing,
Now here's some real amazing things.
which is Drifloon.
Okay.
As I quickly try to.
Now, here's the funny thing. Dusk Noir here, you see what it looks like. I guarantee you this tiny purple balloon is more terrifying.
Seriously?
Yes, because it is whispered that any child who mistakes Drifloon for a balloon and holds on to it could wind up missing.
Wow.
This thing is known for acting as a balloon, a child grabs it, and then it floats them away, never to be seen again.
Damn. That's kind of dark. Is Pokemon getting dark?
Yes.
It was always dark.
Wow. Okay.
It's been dark, my friend.
Wow.
But yes,
okay,
in terms
so-
of an actual representation of Dusk Noir would be the better option for actually ferrying spirits to and from
And you
the
said
physical plane in the
Drifloon as
afterlife.
well.
Okay. but,
Drifloon is just more of a morbid
Okay,
one for
morbid,
the
okay.
death of children.
Okay.
Gotcha. But Dusk Noir is actually interesting because you also see Dusk Noir is, for those who wanted to look it up, it is a rather creepy looking
I am
Pokemon.
as I quickly try to add a image of Dusk Noir to the current image that is in our background for this podcast, and it's gonna be popping on screen just randomly. So
Okay, yeah. As you can see,
There you
it's
go.
creepy.
Yeah.
you will see in like the next couple minutes.
So, but yeah, you can see
Yeah.
that it's creepy, and again, which is a very, it's very off from the other interpretations of death, which were again very welcoming, because death was just a natural part of life. So why did the Grim Reaper decide, suddenly become this foreboding, terrifying skeletal figure? Well, to look at that, we have to consider the time period that the Grim Reaper came about. And the Grim Reaper came about in one of the worst times that you can imagine, something of absolute fear. It came about the time of the Black Death, when how much of the European population just suddenly contracted a horrid disease and died. It was, well, it was terrifying. There was nothing you could do. They didn't have any knowledge of germs or bacteria. So what they saw was this basically unseen force swoop in out of nowhere, and suddenly one person starts off just coughing, and the next moment they're dying, and towns are literally being filled with dead bodies everywhere. And even towns that tried to lock down, half the population in towns died even when they locked down, because, well, they found out later that a lot of the Black Plague was, well, at least they theorized that the Black Plague was spread by fleas who hitched a ride on the back of rats and ships, which brought the Black Death. So I don't give a damn what Ratatouille says, stay away from rats. That's my advice. But you guys can imagine the kind of atmosphere the Black...
So we shouldn't let rats cook our food. Got it.
Yes. And you shouldn't eat rats either.
So
Sorry.
there goes that business strategy.
So, rule of thumb is I think they found that it was the brown rats that are the most likely carriers of the plague compared to like the blacks and white ones.
Yeah. You know, out of context, that sentence could sound really bad now I think about it.
I mean, yes.
Yeah.
Like, just hearing that small section.
And Zed Archimage can probably see now what everyone else can see on screen. That's what that's what they currently see now.
Nice.
I'll probably put a, who's that monster? Like, I'll probably do like that in the next pause before
You could.
like who's that Pokemon monster or something like that. I'll think of it. I'll workshop it.
Okay, sounds good. So yeah, you can imagine the type of atmosphere the Black Death would create. It would create one of absolute fear, panic, dread. Like, you literally have no notion of when your last moment's going to be. Like, we walk around, naturally we all walk around with any moment could be our last, but at that point, with all the death around them, death was constantly on their mind, to the point where they're constantly asking themselves instead, is this moment my last? Which, I stipulate there is nothing people are more afraid of than something they don't know, what they don't understand. Because if you know what something is, it's not as scary. Like, if you are sleeping in a new hotel room or a new bed or something, you hear a strange noise. You don't know what that noise is, and that worries you. But once you know what it is, it's not as scary. You can put a name to it, put a label on it, and you
I gotta
understand
stop you there. I've been to some hotel. Sometimes knowing what the noise is even more horrifying than not knowing what the noise is.
Okay, well, sometimes. So, wouldn't you rather know what the noise is, even
sometimes it's better left unsolved.
Okay, yeah. For the majority of things, it's better we know. Feel better?
A little bit, but not.
And remind me to get a list of what hotels you've been to so I can stay away from
Yeah,
them.
that's probably a good thing.
Anyway, so in this time period, we then have what I think was one of the biggest sources of the Grim Reaper. Was not only this time of fear and desperately wanting some explanation to where we believe almost anything, but then we have entering the Plague Doctor. Now, the Plague Doctors are 50-50 on popularity. Most people don't actually know what a Plague Doctor is, but they do know their mask. Plague Doctors are the ones who have those strange masks with the long beak that you see in many horror films and gothic culture, and where people wear them around as costumes where they don't actually know what they are. The Plague Doctors were real. They often wore leather masks. They were rarely ever black. Normally they were, well, leather, so they were brownish, sometimes white, with glass lenses so that they could see, and long beaks. They also had very thick wax coats on, wax gloves, thick leather pants, thick boots, and often carried a staff. And as you can tell, this would be a pretty creepy thing to look at. Which, funny enough, the long beaks that they're so well known for are actually the most important part of this getup. Yeah, they are the most important part of the getup, at least in the time period, because the nose was filled with herbs, spices, and other things, because at the time, they believed the Black Death was transmuted through poisonous air, which is not true at all, but that's what they believed, so that's why they had that signature nose, which is funny. It was actually the heavy woolen clothes they wore that protected them from the fleas and rats that were actually carrying the plague. But again, that's where their signature look comes from.
Again, they also believe that the plague was partially caused by dirty air.
Yes, that's why they have that's why they have those long snouts, is because they were filled with sweet-smelling herbs to protect from the bad air.
Again, Archimage, I got you covered. If you look in our Discord chat, I'm updating the image real time. You put my Photoshop skill to the test right now.
Awesome. So, Zed, if you saw that coming in after being in a town half your population just died. Would you feel secured and safe?
Sure, he looks friendly.
Right, because birds are so trustworthy, right?
Not the right answer. Oh, hang on. One moment.
If I'm
Was
not
that the right answer?
mistaken, that stick,
Either one works.
I think that stick was specifically for beating people away to keep them that distance away from you while you're trying to move throughout the
Probably.
town, if I'm not
That would
mistaken.
make sense.
Okay, to be fair, they don't actually know what the stick was for, but probably it was just a walking.
Yeah, it looks like it would be a distancing device.
Yeah, it was probably a walking
Also, I
stick, but it
apologize
could have
for
been.
anyone's ears after that stream.
No worries. Okay, so the thing about these plague doctors is their actual purpose to what they actually did. Now, plague doctor, they were supposed to be doctors who went in and were there to try to help the sick. In reality, most towns just hired a bunch of people who knew nothing about medicine, and what they basically ended up doing was went to town, collected money, and then put a bunch of dead people on carts and took them away to be burned or thrown into a mass grave.
Which, to be fair, burning the body was a good idea for the plague.
No, yeah, it was entirely, but the doctors were supposed to help people, but basically they just collected dead people. So that's all they really did. And oftentimes, and you were right, they moved from town to town. And oftentimes, though, here's the thing, they would go, once they were in a town where they'd gathered all the dead people, they would go to the next town because they figured the Black Death would soon come there, which, well, considering this was a plague spreading, they were usually right. So it became that when you saw a plague doctor coming into your town, the Black Death was probably close on in. And it didn't help that oftentimes it was. Where they would be safe because of the heavy cloaks they were wearing, at least most of them, not all of them, some of them definitely contracted it. People would start dying as soon as the plague doctor showed up, and then once the plague doctor was there, they collect bodies and leave. So it wasn't altogether a good image. And, well, that's where a little bit of the grim comes from, because this might have been the creation of their mythos. Now you're probably wondering, while they're creepy, how does Bird Nose turn into a skeleton wielding a scythe? Well, that is where a lot of symbolism comes in. But before that, Zed, Shadow R Fox, anything you want to add about the plague doctors or just general opinions on them and their methods?
So the plague doctor, I always found them a little bit fascinating just because their appearance. It's very Grim Reaper like with the whole cloak and black. The mask itself is what always invoke people, because it's not just the beak. The beak has been used in, I believe, the Italian Renaissance. The beak was commonly used as a party mask.
Yes.
If I'm not mistaken.
You are not?
Thank you, Assassin's Creed Ezio, for all those who got that. So it's not just the plague.
Yeah,
it's not just the plague. It was they did use this for other things. So I guess I'm wondering if the mask itself came from Italian origins.
That's actually a good question, and I am not sure.
I don't know which came first, because I know for a fact the party motif came well after the plague. But I do wonder the fact that the Italian adopted it so quickly, if it came from Italy. Yeah, you gotta think about it. So that's the thing for another day.
Yeah, that's something to think about for another day. But yeah, no, that is an interesting point. And again, it shows already things coming from the plague mask. You know, people adopting it into modern day culture. But also, what creeped people out a lot about the plague mask, I think, was the glass eyes. You know, just those sunken in eyes, like, are always kind of creepy. It's like someone who never blinks. It's creepy.
I was wrong. It came from, well, you guys would. It came from the country we all should suspect that it came from, where the plague hit it the hardest.
France?
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course it's France.
I bet you then,
that makes sense.
if I look up this guy, I bet you he is going to be in that part of France that border Italy.
Probably.
I mean, sorry, are you looking it up or?
Yeah,
is it
no, I'm
just-
looking it up because I'm curious.
Yeah, yeah, no, go ahead. That is interesting.
Zoom out. Zoom out. Dehance. Dehance. No, he's born in the city south of France. Moulins, Moulins was his birthplace.
Okay.
So he is southern France. I guess a little bit southern central France. I'm going off of Paris being most central, but then
Actually,
again,
that
I'm not
does-
from France, so.
That does make sense because there is a thing about France where the southern part is known to be a bit more superstitious. So basically, no matter where you are in a country, everywhere has a south. That's an interesting concept I've never really thought about before, but never mind that. So yeah, the south was known to be a bit more superstitious, especially with their beliefs. I mean, I believe the southern part of France is where the beast of Gévaudan came from. But again, that's for another video. But yeah, okay, that is interesting though that it came from France. But again, you can see some of the influence of the culture as it even made its way to Italian, where they started using it for more of a popular image. But the image clearly stuck with them. So, going back to the Grim Reaper, with how this legend was formed, or basically how a plague doctor turned into a black cloak-clad skeleton wielding a scythe, is you have to basically look at the Grim Reaper as all symbolism. I mean, a skeleton, that's a pretty common symbol of death. Like a skull, it's very common symbol of death, which goes all the way back throughout all of history. I mean, what is a better symbol of death than, a skeleton? Can anyone think of one? Again,
symbol of death. Well, it depends on the culture technically at that point, because some cultures consider some types of birds messengers and symbols of death. Cats was considered the guardians of the underworld by the Egyptians.
Yeah, but in all of them, like, skulls are pretty synonymous with death.
Yes. I'm seriously trying to think of another symbol of death that we know of that isn't a skull.
Yeah, because it's pretty embedded in there. Skull
Because I think
probably
crows and ravens were the first thing that came to mind, because those are often regarded as messengers or creatures of death. Dogs, hellhounds, those were regarded as beasts of death. I know there's certain types of plants, nightshades, I think, was regarded. I know there was a type of poisonous plant that was regarded as death.
Deadly nightshade, yeah.
And again, I'm having to dig through some obscure.
Yeah, but actually, no. It's good that you brought that up, because that also brings up the other thing. The Grim Reaper is cloaked in black. Like you mentioned with the Hellhounds, with the Raven, most of them are black in color. They're forbidding. They come at night, where night is shown as this terrifying thing of the unknown. The night covers things. You're not safe at night. That whole shtick.
Yeah.
Which also makes sense why the Reaper is colored black. And then finally, the scythe. Believe it or not, the scythe is not a badass weapon. I don't care what the anime show Ruby says. The scythe is not a weapon. It is a harvesting tool. It is meant for harvesting grain and wheat.
And
that
souls.
is its purpose. Yes.
And lives.
No, actually. If you've ever tried to wield a scythe, it would actually be a very lousy weapon.
I've wielded a comma, which is like a baby scythe.
And you said it was a lousy weapon.
Yeah, I said it was I said it was a peasant tool, sir.
The scythe isn't much better, but the scythe is a harvesting tool. That's what it's meant to do. It is meant to harvest things. So you literally have a skeleton in black with a harvesting tool who harvests souls. So that's the entire symbolism: foreboding, death, and harvesting, which basically describes the Grim Reaper to a T. Another good look at, if you want to know something about monsters, if you want to know a little bit about them and possibly get an idea of where they came from, I found that understanding the name really helps because we don't always think about what words mean. Like a lot of us will use words constantly, and in reality, if we're asked the definition, we don't even know what it means. We just have context clues of what it may mean. Period. Why did I say period? I have no idea. Anyway, a good example of this is the word fortuitous. A lot of people use fortuitous, not as much nowadays because our education system sucks, but a lot of people used to use the word fortuitous, and oftentimes when they use it in the terms where it means lucky. But it actually doesn't mean lucky at all. What it actually means is by chance. Or if you want to add lucky into it, by a lucky chance, but altogether fortuitous does not mean lucky. It just means unlikely to have happened. So happening by chance. I mean, you guys probably think of other words that you use all the time, but have never really stopped to think of the definition.
And I do have to say, we did hit the timer,
Yeah.
so I didn't know if you wanted to keep going.
It's close to being... Yeah, let's keep going.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll work this out, but because we had the introduction, which took a bit of time.
Yeah.
We won't have to do the introduction every time.
Yeah.
So yeah, fortuitous. So we don't always know what words mean. So when we're looking at monsters, really look into what the monster's name actually means. Grim Reaper. You know, Reaper is very obvious. Someone who reaps. You reap what you sow. Someone takes in, a harvester. That's obvious. But Grim actually does have a meaning. And Grim, unsurprisingly, means forbidding, uninviting, mirthless, black, or depressing. Which sums up the Grim Reaper very, very earnestly. I mean, can you think of a more clear-cut description for the Grim Reaper than that? Anyone?
Death is
No.
stealth. Death? Yeah.
Exactly, which, yeah, that is the definition. So, with that, with all the information, the time period, what I think happened to the creation of the Grim Reaper is that I believe that in the time where people were basically just dropping dead with no explanation, people were looking for any kind of explanation. Even if it sounded ridiculous. They wanted something to be afraid of, because when you put a label on it, for most things, for the majority of things, when you know what it is or can put a name to it or a label, it becomes less scary. Yes, Shadow R. Fox, I know for not everything, but for most things, okay?
Yeah, okay.
And they were desperately looking for that. And then along comes the Plague Doctor. Plague Doctors were meant to be helpful, but let's face it, the majority of them were not. The majority of them were, at best, corpse grabbers. They were collecting corpses, and let's be honest, probably some of them were stealing valuables from the corpse. I mean, that's how people are. So, and then they would travel from town to town, and people would see them and probably know the Black Death would be coming to their town soon. They became this omen of death. And over the years, they would have eventually started tagging death with these plague doctors, so relating death with them. So they essentially almost became death. Then as stories told about beware plague doctor, you know, whenever it's a good story, they like to keep telling. But as we know, the Black Death didn't last forever. After it killed a good portion of Europe, it did eventually go away. In England, of course, in London, of course, it's famous the Black Death was gotten rid of when the baker burned the bread and most of the wooden town of London burned to the ground, which is why it is illegal to build a building solely made out of wood in London to this day. The Globe Theatre had to get special permission to do it, actually, for historical reference. But because of that, again, the stories kept going. But, you know, a guy in a bird suit doesn't sound that intimidating. So what they do, they sensationalize it. And the sensationalization has to make sense, usually. So what better things to make sense than skeleton, harvesting tool, and black cloaks? And eventually that became the Grim Reaper. And I think the biggest reason the Grim Reaper lasted is because it's such an iconic image. It's kind of interesting that of all the deities who are nice and kind, who are welcoming and inviting, the one that we've chosen to kind of really populate our modern day is the forbidding one, the agent of death that looks terrifying. It is interesting that that's the one we chose. why do you guys think that's the one that we kind of focus?
Yeah, because death is the biggest mystery that our ancestors never understood and never could wrap their heads around. So it's probably one of the things they fear most.
It's fair. Zed?
I mean, the only reason I can think of why the Grim Reaper became the more iconic icon of it is just due to the timing. It's probably more recent and fresh in people's heads than any depiction that existed before it.
Yeah, and to be fair, it also, you got a point, also came during a very, like, dramatic time. I mean, the Black Death is still, like, the most famous plague of all time, so yeah, maybe that makes sense. Or maybe we all just, like, have this great fascination for the macabre and dangerous that we don't like to admit. So, yeah, but all in all, that's probably close to how the Grim Reaper origin came about. From doctors who were meant to help to forbidding dark Reaper of souls to take you to your underworld. I mean, heck, I hope that gives a good lesson on how monsters, and especially monster stories, can evolve, and we'll be exploring more with them as it goes. Anything you guys want to add about the Grim Reaper? Any questions you might have or points you want to bring up?
Man, I just found it funny that you brought up how a scythe is a horrible weapon in reference to Ruby when Ruby has a character that was called the Grim Reaper.
Who used the scythe?
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yes, they did. I can find a picture.
Okay, again, you see my point. It is permeated our culture.
To be fair, with that character in particular, she had the unique ability where her eyes would essentially turn all monsters to stone. So, a little bit more OP than just a woman running around with a scythe. It was a woman who could literally look someone into death.
Damn, so like a Red Riding Hood basilisk almost.
Yes,
huh?
Exactly like that.
Damn, okay.
Yeah, here you go. There's the picture.
Okay. Well, again, Grim Reaper symbolism all the way there.
Oh, am I gonna have to do that real fast?
Yep.
Oh, Zed, you gave me. Zed, why don't you save me a little bit of time and just copy and paste that into Discord so I can quickly add that to I'm not gonna.
Copy image.
Yeah,
just save me a couple minutes, please.
Okay, and while they're doing that, a shout out.
There you go.
I'll be giving a shout out to the book that we're going to be going through, Probable, Possible, Plausible, an explanatory guide to monsters of myth. We'll be talking about each one of the monsters listed, and of course, if you'd like more information that we perhaps didn't cover in this podcast, you can get it on Amazon. And
I'm going to have I'm gonna have the link in the description. I actually did that as you were doing the introduction. That was one of the things I was doing was getting the link to the book, and so that way I could actually, I don't know why Zed, but it didn't want to come in, so don't worry, I got you.
What?
The image. Nice.
Okay, there, the picture.
Oh, there we go.
Through.
It did not want to come in. It was like, no, I'm gonna make Shadow all Fox work hard.
No, it was so slow.
The Grim Reaper, forbidding to the end.
Forbidding to the end. Man, the fact that I'm able to do this in real time.
Hey, no, kudos. But yes, that will cover our edition on the Grim Reaper and its mythology. I encourage you, of course, to look up more, buy the book, take a look, and really look at monsters. Maybe there's more to it than you think. I hope you'll join us again next time when we're going to be looking over possibly the most famous monster in the world, vampires. No, we will not be covering the themes of Twilight.
Oh,
that will not take.
Wait, you mean they don't sparkle?
They do not.
I'm warning you right now. If you make any Twilight references, I will find you and I will make you suffer.
Yes. So again, we will not be covering the themes of Twilight. We will be covering actual vampiric things. We'll be covering their mythos. So, with that, did you guys have any final words?
No. I'm I gotta get faster with my editing.
I'm just now sitting here trying to. I'm now sitting here because I'm gonna have to find a Pokemon, and I not only have to find a Pokemon that's now like a vampire, which shouldn't be that hard, but I now have to find a voice changer to turn my voice into the Pokedex voice.
All right, Zed has got his challenge. Shadow R. Fox is flexing his real-time muscles. Sounds like a good place to stop. I hope you all have enjoyed this, and we will hopefully hear from you again.
See you guys.
See ya.
Later.